Okay, now we have our tools and flooring material. The next step is to prepare the area to be covered or repaired. If installing over any substrates other than concrete, the tiles or whatever is left in place must be adhered to the substrate and structurally sound, otherwise it must be removed prior to the installation. Another important fact is there cannot be any water or moisture present on top of or underneath the tiles or whatever is left in place. If there is any moisture on the surface being installed over, it must be completely dried out prior to installing the epoxy floor. If this is not done, there's a good chance that the epoxy will eventually lose its adhesion. We want to strongly emphasize that prior to starting and in between each phase of work, the surface remains completely free of any kind of residue or dust before proceeding to the next step. For this training session, we're going to follow a typical installation procedure involving a painted concrete substrate from start to finish. Afterwards, we'll talk about considerations for other flooring types. Now that you've isolated the area from foot traffic and removed all unnecessary material, let's prepare the floor surface. The preparation procedure used will be dependent upon floor type, and since our floor is concrete, here's what we need to do. Step 1 is to ensure that the concrete is fully cured before installing epoxy flooring over it. A minimum of 30 days curing time at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Sometimes where the concrete slab meets a wall, there'll be uneven concrete buildup or a board that's been installed between the CMU block and the concrete slab. You want that intersection to be smooth and the intersection point at a 90-degree angle. In our example here, that board was raised up 1/4 inch and runs the entire perimeter of this garage. So we used a grinder until it was flush with the floor. When installing this product, it's important to remember that it's designed to follow the contour of the substrates that it's being installed over. If you have any kind of buildup whatsoever that would leave an uneven or rough finish floor, you will want to sand it down so it's smooth prior to installation. You'll also want to ensure that the concrete is smooth or has a broom finish for installation. If it isn't, you'll need to grind, skim, seal, or underlay the concrete until it's consistent throughout. If there's any paint on the substrate, you'll need to either sand or grind it off thoroughly before installing the floor. This is done because the floor will adhere to the paint, and if the paint ever loses its adhesion, then the epoxy floor will be loose with the paint because the epoxy is adhered to the paint and not the concrete. You can use a 7-inch grinder with dust shroud and vacuum for removing paint. Likewise, if there's any adhesive, mastic, or anything similar, complete removal needs to be attempted. Next, you'll want to patch any holes with underlayment or skim resin. If there are any cracks, control joints, or saw cuts in the floor, you'll need to clean these out by using a brush and vacuum. Then you'll want to install white fiber mesh tape over them, spanning the edges a minimum of 1 inch on each side. After this tape is installed, you'll install the skim resin over the fiber tape. Let it cure for 8 hours. Your option is to leave them uncovered and treat them as control joints. After the resin has cured, sand off any large ridge marks created when applying the skim resin. The floor is now ready for the epoxy installation.